The young recruits stood at the firing line, laughing as they loaded their rifles with the newest military-grade ammunition. One of them, a cocky 20-something with a fresh haircut and spotless uniform, glanced over at the old man standing quietly at the end of the range. The old man wore a faded red jacket over a worn t-shirt, his white hair and beard catching the morning light, his expression sad and serious as always. The recruit nudged his buddy and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "These new rounds fly further, Pops. Maybe you should sit this one out before you embarrass yourself." The other recruits snickered, adjusting their scopes and checking their gear with the confidence of youth. The old man said nothing. He simply reached into his weathered canvas bag and pulled out a box of ammunition so old the cardboard had yellowed with age. Surplus rounds from decades past. The recruits exchanged glances and laughed harder. But what happened next would silence every single one of them and teach a lesson about respect they would never forget. If you believe experience deserves honor, comment respect right now. His name was Marcus, and 70 years had etched deep lines into his weathered face. The red jacket he wore every day had seen better decades, the fabric thin at the elbows, a small tear near the pocket that he had never bothered to mend. Beneath it, a plain grey t-shirt hung loose on his frame. Most days, Marcus kept to himself in the small town where he had retired 15 years ago. He lived alone in a modest house at the edge of town, the kind of place people drove past without a second glance. His truck was older than most of the recruits at the range, rusted in spots, the paint faded to a dull memory of what it once was. Nobody asked Marcus about his past, nobody seemed to care. He was just the old guy who sometimes showed up at the public shooting range on Saturday mornings, moving slowly, speaking rarely, his sad eyes focused on something distant that only he could see. The local range had become popular with young military recruits from the nearby base. They came on their days off, full of energy and pride, showing off their new equipment and training. The range master, a middle-aged man named Dale, who had served a brief stint in the National Guard decades ago, generally let them have free run of the place. They were loud, competitive, constantly trying to one-up each other with their groupings and their gear. When Marcus arrived that Saturday morning, the range was already full of them. 8 young men and 2 women, all in their early 20s, all wearing pieces of their uniforms mixed with civilian clothes, all carrying the latest rifles and the newest ammunition the military had issued. They had set up an informal competition, seeing who could hit targets at progressively longer distances. Marcus signed in quietly at the desk, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he wrote his name in the logbook. Dale barely looked up, just nodded and waved him through. Marcus made his way to lane 12, the furthest from the group of recruits. He moved with the careful deliberation of age, setting down his worn canvas bag, unzipping it slowly. Inside was a rifle that made the recruits glance over and smirk when they noticed it. The weapon was a vintage M1 Garand, its woodstock dark with age and oil, the metal parts showing the patina of decades. It was the kind of rifle their grandfathers might have used. "Museum piece," one of them muttered, and the others laughed. Marcus began his routine, the same one he had followed for more than 50 years. He checked the rifle methodically, his movements precise despite the tremor in his hands. He set up his spotting scope, adjusted the height of his shooting rest, laid out his ammunition with careful spacing. The box was marked with dates from the 1960s, military surplus that most shooters would have thrown away years ago. The rounds themselves looked dull compared to the shiny brass casings the recruits were loading into their modern rifles. One of the female recruits, a sharp-faced woman with her hair pulled back tight, walked past Marcus's lane on her way to check a target. She paused, looked at his setup, and called back to her friends, "Hey guys, check out Grandpa's antiques over here." More laughter rippled through the group. The informal competition continued. The recruits were shooting at targets set at 300 yards, then 400, then 500. They were good, their training evident in their stances and breathing. Rounds pinged off the steel targets with satisfying regularity. They high-fived each other, compared notes, argued good-naturedly about who was better. The cocky one who had spoken first, a tall kid named Brennan with arms covered in fresh tattoos, was winning. He had hit the 500-yard target 7 times out of 10, and he was not shy about celebrating. He loaded a fresh magazine, chambered a round, and announced to everyone, "Watch this, old-timers. This is how it is done with modern equipment." He fired, and the distant steel sang. Perfect hit. Brennan stood up from his shooting position, brushing dust off his knees. He looked down the line of lanes, and his eyes settled on Marcus, who was just settling into position behind his ancient rifle. "Hey, Pops!" Brennan called out. "You even gonna be able to hit the berm from here?" The group laughed again. Marcus did not respond. He simply pressed his cheek against the worn stock of the Garand, his sad eyes focusing through the iron sights. No scope, no modern optics. Just the same sights that had been on the rifle when it was manufactured more than 60 years ago. One of the other recruits, a shorter man with glasses named Chen, said, "Give the old guy a break, Brennan. He is probably just here for nostalgia." Brennan shrugged, still grinning, and said, "Nostalgia does not hit targets, brother. Modern equipment, modern training, modern results." Dale, the rangemaster, had been watching from his position near the entrance. Something about the way Marcus held himself, the precision of his movements, triggered a memory. Dale walked closer, squinting at the old man in the red jacket. He had seen Marcus here dozens of times over the years, but had never really paid attention. Now, watching him settle into a shooting position that was textbook perfect despite his age, Dale felt a flicker of recognition. Where had he seen that posture before? That exact way of breathing, of becoming still as stone before the shot? Marcus fired. The sound of the Garand was different from the modern rifles, deeper, more resonant. A sound from another era. The round flew down range and struck the 500-yard steel target dead center. The metallic clang echoed back across the range. Marcus worked the action, the distinctive ping of the Garand's clip ejecting, making several of the recruits look over. He reloaded with practice speed and fired again. Another hit, then another, then another. 8 shots, 8 hits, all within a span that would have fit inside a dinner plate. The recruits had stopped their own shooting to watch. The laughter had died away. Brennan stared at the distant target, then at Marcus, then back at the target. He raised his binoculars, studying the grouping. "Impossible," he muttered. "That ammo has to be 50 years old. The ballistics should be all over the place." Marcus stood up slowly from his shooting position, his knees creaking audibly. He began to clean his rifle with the same methodical care he had shown in preparing it. The recruits gathered in a small cluster, talking in lower voices now, glancing over at the old man who had just outshot all of them with equipment they considered obsolete. Chen, the recruit with glasses, walked over to Marcus's lane. He stood there for a moment, uncertain, then said, "Sir, that was incredible shooting. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Marcus looked up, his sad, serious face showing no pride, no satisfaction. He simply said in a quiet voice, "A long time ago, in places most people have forgotten about." Chen waited for more, but Marcus offered nothing else. He returned to cleaning his rifle, his weathered hands moving over the metal and wood with the familiarity of countless repetitions. Dale had moved closer too, and now he was staring at Marcus with an intensity that made the old man finally look up. Dale's face had gone pale. He was looking at the canvas bag, at a patch sewn onto its side that he had never noticed before. A faded unit insignia. Dale's lips moved silently, reading the words. Then his eyes went wide. He took a step back, his hand coming up to his mouth. "Oh my God," he whispered. The recruits heard the change in Dale's voice and turned to look. Brennan asked, "What is it, Dale? What is wrong?" Dale did not answer Brennan. He was staring at Marcus, and his entire demeanor had changed. He stood straighter, his casual slouch disappearing. When he spoke, his voice was tight with emotion. "Sir," he said, Are you Marcus Hendricks?" Marcus stopped cleaning his rifle. For a long moment, he did not move. Then, slowly, he nodded once. Dale's face flushed red. He turned to the gathered recruits, his voice sharp now. "Attention, all of you, right now." The recruits, confused but responding to the command in his voice, straightened up. Dale pointed at Marcus. "Do any of you know who this man is?" The recruits shook their heads. Brennan said, "Just some old guy who can shoot, I guess." Dale's voice rose, anger and shame mixing together. "This is not just some old guy. This is Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Hendricks, United States Marine Corps, retired. He served 3 tours in Vietnam. He was a sniper instructor at Quantico for 15 years. He has more confirmed kills than all of you combined will ever see in your entire careers, and he trained half the sniper instructors currently serving in the Corps." The recruits stood frozen. Brennan's cocky expression had vanished, replaced by something between shock and horror. Dale continued, his voice shaking now. "And you have been disrespecting him for the last hour like he is some kind of joke." Marcus held up a hand, his voice still quiet. "Dale, it is fine." They did not know. But Dale was not finished. He turned back to the recruits. "That rifle he is shooting, that museum piece as you called it, that is the same rifle he used in Vietnam. Those surplus rounds, that old ammunition you laughed at, he knows exactly how they perform because he has been shooting them for 50 years. He does not need your modern scopes and your fancy optics because he learned to shoot when missing meant people died." The silence on the range was absolute now. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Chen was the first to move. He walked directly to Marcus's lane, came to attention, and saluted. "Sir, I apologize for my disrespect. I was ignorant and I was wrong." Marcus looked at the young man for a long moment, then returned the salute with the precision of decades of service. One by one, the other recruits followed. They formed a line, each coming to attention, each saluting, each offering their apologies. Some of their voices cracked with emotion. The two female recruits had tears in their eyes. When Brennan's turn came, he could barely speak. "Sir," he managed, "I am so sorry. I was completely out of line." Marcus studied the young man's face, seeing genuine shame and remorse there. He nodded slowly. "You are young," he said quietly. "You have training and equipment I could only dream of when I was your age. But never forget that experience and skill matter more than gear. Respect matters more than technology." Brennan nodded, unable to meet the old man's sad, serious eyes. Dale had pulled out his phone and was making a call, his voice urgent. Within 20 minutes, a staff car pulled up to the range, and a Marine Corps officer in full dress uniform stepped out. He was a colonel, his chest heavy with ribbons and decorations. He walked directly to Marcus, and before anyone could say anything, the colonel came to attention and saluted. "Gunny Hendricks," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent range. "I heard you were here. Sir, it is an honor." Marcus returned the salute, and for the first time that day, something that might have been a smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Colonel Patterson," he said. "I taught you at Quantico, must be 20 years ago now." 22 years, sir," the colonel replied. "You taught me everything I know about long-range shooting. I would not have the career I have without you." The colonel turned to address the assembled recruits. His voice was formal, commanding. "This man," he said, "is a legend in the Marine Corps. His record as a sniper is still classified, but I can tell you that he saved countless American lives through his skill and dedication. After his combat service, he spent 15 years passing on his knowledge to new generations of Marines. Some of the best snipers in our military today were trained by Gunny Hendricks or by instructors he trained. He is the kind of Marine we all aspire to be." The recruits stood at rigid attention, many of them visibly emotional now. Brennan had tears running down his face. The colonel reached into his uniform and pulled out a small box. "Gunny," he said, "I have been trying to track you down for months. You never attended your own retirement ceremony. You never collected your final commendations, and you have been avoiding every attempt we have made to honor you properly." Marcus started to shake his head, but the colonel continued. "Sir, with all due respect, you do not get a choice this time." He opened the box, revealing a medal. "This is the Bronze Star with Valor device that was approved for you 30 years ago for actions in Beirut. You refused it then. You are accepting it now." The colonel pinned the medal to Marcus's red jacket, the bright ribbon a stark contrast to the faded fabric. The range erupted in applause. The recruits were clapping, some of them cheering, all of them with new understanding in their eyes. Dale was wiping tears from his face. Marcus stood there in his worn red jacket and old t-shirt, his white hair and beard almost glowing in the afternoon sun, his expression still sad and serious, but something had shifted. The weight he had been carrying seemed somehow lighter. The colonel stepped back and saluted again, holding it until Marcus returned it. Then he turned to the recruits. "I expect all of you," he said, "to remember this day. Remember that you never know who you are standing next to. Remember that respect costs nothing but means everything. Remember that the person you dismiss might be the person who paved the way for everything you have." After the colonel left, the recruits approached Marcus differently. They asked if he would watch them shoot, offer advice, share his knowledge. Marcus agreed quietly. For the next 2 hours, he worked with each of them, correcting stances, adjusting breathing techniques, teaching the fundamentals that no amount of modern technology could replace. Brennan proved to be an attentive student, his earlier arrogance completely gone. When Marcus showed him a subtle adjustment to his trigger pull, Brennan's grouping tightened immediately. The young man looked at his target, then at Marcus and said, "Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving me a chance after how I acted." Marcus nodded. "We all have to learn," he said. "Some lessons just come harder than others." As the sun began to set and the range prepared to close, the recruits gathered around Marcus one final time. Chen spoke for the group. "Sir," he said, "would you be willing to come to the base sometime? Our unit would be honored to have you speak to us, maybe run some training. We need to hear from people like you. We need to learn from people like you." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his sad eyes looking at each of their young faces. Then he nodded, slowly. "I think I would like that," he said. "It has been a long time since I felt like I had something to offer." Brennan shook his head emphatically. "Sir, you have everything to offer. Today you taught us more than just shooting. You taught us about humility and respect and never judging people by what they look like on the outside." Marcus packed up his rifle with the same careful precision he had used all day. The recruits helped him carry his equipment to his old truck, treating each piece like it was made of glass. They stood at attention as he drove away, his red jacket visible through the rear window, his white hair and beard catching the last rays of sunlight. Dale stood with them, watching until the truck disappeared. "That man," Dale said quietly, "spent his whole life serving this country, and then he just disappeared into retirement like he did not matter. He lives alone, he keeps to himself, and until today, I never even knew who he was." The shame in his voice was evident. The recruits nodded, understanding now what they had almost missed, what they had almost lost through their own arrogance and assumptions. The next Saturday, when Marcus arrived at the range, everything had changed. The recruits were already there, and they had brought others. Word had spread through the base about the old man in the red jacket who could outshoot anyone with a rifle older than their parents. They greeted him with respect, with genuine warmth, with eagerness to learn. Dale had prepared Lane 12 for him, making sure everything was set up perfectly. On the wall behind the check-in desk, he had hung a framed photo he had found in the Marine Corps archives, a young Marcus in uniform, his face unlined but his eyes already holding that same serious, sad expression. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Hendricks, USMC, Instructor, Mentor, Legend." Marcus stood looking at the photo for a long time. Then he turned to the gathered recruits, to Dale, to the range that had become something more than just a place to shoot. His voice was still quiet, still measured, but there was warmth in it now that had not been there before. "All right," he said, "let us see what you have learned." And as the morning sun climbed higher and the sound of gunfire echoed across the range, an old man in a faded red jacket taught a new generation the lessons he had learned in jungles and deserts and mountains far away. Lessons about skill and patience and respect, lessons that no amount of modern technology could ever replace, lessons that would be passed down through the years to come, carried forward by young men and women who had learned to see past appearances and recognize the true worth that lives in every person, no matter how humble they might seem.